Good morning, class. Welcome to Module 4. This module is titled, The WNBA is So Important. Many of y'all are probably thinking we're just going to talk about the WNBA. That is not the case. That tagline, the WNBA is so important, comes from Ari Chambers, who is a friend of mine in the industry. And she really, I think it's her moniker. I think she monetized it. But what she was saying is that the WNBA is so important for so many different reasons, particularly for what it does for girls in sport, particularly for what it does for girls of color in sport and the broader socio-political landscape the WNBA has centered themselves in. And so the focus of this week, oftentimes when broader conversations, when we talk about the Black athlete, there are these innuendos where we're just talking about men. And so we do have to say the Black female athlete experience. And so that's what we're doing in Module 4. There will be no discussions of men, no Black male athletes, just Black girls. We are going to take this down to the youth level a little bit and Black women in sport participation. And with us this week, we've already heard from Dr. Brown, but we have another amazing professor from the University of Texas at Austin. I'm a former Longhorn, so hook 'em, Dr. Shaw, and I'm going to let her introduce herself.
Hey everyone, I am Dr. Quasia Shaw. As Dr. Keaton said, I am an assistant professor at the University of Texas. I am a previous Division I basketball player. I played at the University at Albany for a very, very short stint. And I've been doing research for the past couple of years on the Black female athlete experience, specifically looking at intersectionality, barriers to participation, and other social justice issues surrounding the Black female athlete. And as Dr. Keaton said, it is very, very, very important to specify that Black female part, because as I'm going to talk about later, this kind of idea of othering for women that has become a really big issue within sport. So.
And I told you I wasn't going to go too far off the script of questions, but you already threw it out there. So for the class, can you discuss and highlight for them what intersectionality is, what it actually looks like in praxis, and kind of the historical roots of where this theoretical lens comes from?
Yeah, so intersectionality is this idea of a multitude of converging identities on top of one another that creates a greater oppression, a greater marginalization, a greater silencing for an individual. And so a Black female athlete is positioned very uniquely because they are intersectional, because they're race and they're gendered. So they are the other to the Black man, but then they are also the other to a white woman. And so that places them very uniquely in a different scope of analysis than we would typically a Black male or a white female athlete. So this idea of intersectionality, there are other identities that I know that you've probably discussed that also converge on top of that. So then we have age, we have disability, ability, we have sexuality, preferences, and things of that nature. And so when all of those separately start to converge on top of each other, that creates what the unique experience of what intersectionality is, that experience is very unique and different from any other group. And so I think we often ignore that idea of intersectionality, and we have this idea of grouping Black female athletes either with Black men, and then so they just talk about the Black athlete experience, or that they get grouped with white women and they just talk about the female athlete experience. That is very, very wrong to do, because those experiences are very, very different for a Black woman in either of those instances.
Yeah, I appreciate you breaking that down for them. Thank you. And so we haven't talked about youth sport much in the course. We talked about college, professional, amateur sport. And so can you discuss with me the Black female athlete youth sport experience and how that has shown up in your research at all?
Yeah, so Black female youth are very, very interesting. I've been looking at participation rates for female athletes of color for a while, and then specifically Black female athletes, and this idea of socialization, right? So we are all socialized to do and act in certain ways according to our environment, the people that we interact with, and other things of that nature. And so young Black women, and we know, let's just throw it out there, youth are very, very, very influenced, right? They're very easily influenced. And so our surroundings and what people are telling us to do, whether that's subconsciously or not, is very easy and telling. And you can see that in participation rates for Black women. And so since the enactment of Title IX, everyone will say, hey, look at all the opportunities that we've had for female athletes since its enactment. But when you look at that, Black females were disproportionately affected by that. So when we're looking at participation rates, we're looking at the introduction of sports that Black females can't technically participate in because they don't have the resources to do it. And so we start seeing Black females getting socialized into sports of either basketball or track and field. And because the cost of some of these more elite, that's how they would talk about sports, tennis, golf, soccer, maybe even volleyball, Black females, they lose that opportunity to participate in those sports because one, they want to play a sport where they see other people that look like them play, right? So when they look at what sports Black women are playing, they're like, okay, my options are basketball, track and field. And then they get this other socialization factor from their family, from their coaches, from people around them, telling them, yeah, that's right. The only sport you really should be focusing on is basketball and track and field. And then on the other hand of that, when you do get Black females who decide, oh, I do want to participate in these other sports, these more elite sports, if they actually can afford it, which most of the time they cannot, then they start to experience discrimination and marginalization within the sport. So when you look at the Serena Williams, the Cocos, the Naomi Osakas, right now they're the only one. And so now they're experiencing marginalization and discrimination within that sport. And so it's kind of like a double-edged sword. Do I want to participate in this sport and then be unhappy, not be welcomed and things of that nature? Or do I kind of just go along the lines of what everyone else is telling me to do, what media, society, my family is telling me to do, and go and join these sports that are probably going to be a little bit more welcoming?
Right.
And so we see Black females kind of get thrown into this system of constantly being overrepresented now in the sports of basketball and track and field, but they're still underrepresented out of all athletes of all demographics. So it's a very interesting conundrum that they're in right now.
Yeah, when I think about oh, you might have to figure something out. How's that? Okay, good. When I think about my experience, I, played softball, played soccer, but there was something about basketball and being in community with other girls that looked like me that is really why I decided to stick with basketball. And then like you, went on to play in college. When you brought up Serena Williams, do you remember the very race gendered cartoon graphic of someone, a lot of y'all in this class probably hear Serena Williams and you're like, yeah, the GOAT, one of the GOATs of sport, but one of the GOATs of tennis. But even though she's the GOAT, she's treated, again, if we apply what Dr. Shaw said about intersectionality, there's systems, broader systems of sexism and racism where she's not always treated like the LeBron James or Michael Jordan of her sport, the Sue Bird of her sport. So can you talk about that graphic a little bit and then help the students make sense how you can apply intersectionality?
Yeah, so I was actually going to get to that. I use that image in almost every single one of my classes, regardless of the topic, because it always is applicable to what we are talking about. And so this idea of, one of the greatest athletes of all time, you can't even say women athletes, one of the greatest athletes of all time being depicted in this racist, sexist, chauvinistic kind of manner. And if you've never seen it before, it's very easy to look up. I believe it was in the New York Times, so it's super easy to just Google and look at it. And a lot of people are shocked. They're like, well, I don't remember this. Black female athletes, they're always, again, with this intersectionality, dealing with some type of oppression, right? So strip away her womanhood or her Blackhood. Oh, there we go. Thank you, Dr. Keaton. And just look at the way that she's depicted. So if people don't understand, this has origins in our mammy kind of depiction of what Black women were like back in the days. And so we're looking at this idea. And so this all stemmed from her addressing one of the officials because they said that she was cheating or inappropriately communicating with her coach during the match. how many times have we seen LeBron James or Kobe Bryant or Steph Curry or somebody throw a ball, right? Throw a towel, kick over something. And that's just boys being boys, right? Men being men. They're just expressing their emotion. That's just the way that sport is. But for women, particularly Black women, we start falling into these stereotypes of the angry Black woman, right? Being a crybaby, being a poor sport, and all of these kinds of things when they're expressing the same type of emotion. And so this is why intersectionality is so important, because we talk about the idea of, oh, well, athletes are just athletes. Don't they just want to be supported or appreciated as an athlete? But that's not true, because that's not how we see them. As a Black woman, you're always going to see me as a Black woman, whether I'm an athlete, no matter how successful I am or whatever the case may be. And that becomes very apparent when we look at the media, when we look at the way that announcers talk about Black female athletes, always focusing on their bodies, their body language, the way that they look, everything other than their athleticism. Right. So imagine one of the greatest athletes of all time, Serena Williams, is depicted like this because she decided to express emotion and express her opinions.
Right. I'm gonna, for background, I'll put you on mute real quick. If y'all remember the Jay-Z assignment that you did in module 3, and you remember the minstrel elements to that music video that y'all analyzed, and if you were attuned to the lips, that was also part of this minstrel, very rooted in anti-Blackness during the Reconstruction era. And you see it applied here to Serena Williams. She's drawn not to scale, not to size. Like, yes, she's a very strong, athletic woman, but look at how they drew the white woman in the background. Very frail, very calm, very, can't you just let her win? Even this dynamic that she's throwing a temper tantrum, a fit that's unwarranted, and that she can't express self, again, because of the intersectionality and how that manifests itself in sport. And so really kind of just take in the graphic, because there's a lot there to digest. I also want to discuss with you Black women in sport and what they represent historically and contemporaneously. And so when we see Black women participating in sport, is it bigger than self in the same way that we've always seen Black athletes represent something more, represent their race? What do you think?
Yeah, I believe in this day and age, it's so important. We keep hearing people say, representation matters. But for Black women and where we are in sport right now, representation absolutely does matter. And when we are seeing more people like ourselves in the media, whether it's portrayed negatively or positively, at least that's somewhere in the world saying that we can carve out a space for ourselves. What we do with that opportunity is kind of like all up to us. I don't know, Dr. Keaton, if you remember, about 7 or 8 years back, we had kind of like this wave or this phenomenon of the carefree Black girl feminism, right? And so we're seeing Black athletes and Black women kind of not being careless, let's throw that out, but carefree and just unapologetically being themselves and kind of not trying not to conform, but kind of breaking against these stereotypes of what it is to be a woman, to be Black, to be straight, heteronormative, or whatever the case may be. And that kind of emergence, we were starting to see a little spark of what we could be if we kind of stood up against these forms of oppression. But then on the other hand of that, you don't want to further ostracize or marginalize yourselves. And so you're in this weird place where you want to conform to the system so that you can continue to play and continue to participate. But then at the same time, you're kind of restricting yourself, and we're doing this kind of code switching, self-switching, hypersensitive living of trying to exist as a Black athlete. So I think the more Black women we see in these sporting spaces, even in our position in higher education and upper levels of, we just had the Raiders, then they just hired their first Black president. So like seeing stuff like that, I think is definitely helpful. And it's starting to increase the conversation. People keep asking, but why do we keep talking about Black women? Why do we keep talking about Black women? Haven't we been talking about that for however long? But we've been talking about it, and we're still at a very slow pace of any kind of change. And so I don't think anybody wants to be the voice of all Black women. Nobody wants to be the face of all Black women, but there needs to be some kind of conversation and some type of shift to kind of help us keep going in that direction. And so I think for sport, that's a great avenue for us. You know, we're still trying to break through on politics and in education and other avenues, and at least we have that face. We are overrepresented in sport, and so hopefully some way we can be using that to leverage some type of opportunities for us.
Thank you. Last question is for the students in this class, you know, there's a diversity of experience. Some of them are student athletes here at U of L. I have students who are returning back to school for masters, some doc students, some students in their later 40s. And so what do you think, with such an array of diversity in this class, that you want them to know about the Black female athlete experience? What is the takeaway here before we conclude this talk?
I think the biggest thing here, I want to point out that Black people are not monolithic. And so that's also the same for Black women. My family is actually Jamaican, and so I'm from Jamaica, and so I'm a Jamaican American playing in America. And so that looks very different than someone born here playing a sport. And so Dr. Keaton had mentioned earlier that she played several different sports. My family was actually mad at me for playing basketball. They wanted me to play soccer because that is what's more popular in Jamaica. And then of course, we all know track. And I told myself I don't want to run, so I chose a different sport. But that's all to say is that you can find yourself in any of the issues that Black women are talking about. Until we are all free, we are all oppressed in some way or shape or form. And so you can find some type of similarity or some way to relate to the plight of Black women and helping move that in a way for positive change. Whether that is you relate to us racially or sexually or gendered, whatever the case may be, there is some type of synonymous situation or way that you can relate to us and kind of help us. So I want to say dig deep within. There's so many more issues and things that are going on within this community that can't even touch on, and we would be here for days if I was really to get into that. And so I think for any kind of real progress, we need allies. And I hate the word ally. Dr. Keaton knows I don't like it, but we do need other voices to kind of help bring this issue along. And so tap into your resources, keep reading and kind of digging into the issues that are out there and see if there's something that interests you or that aligns with the Black female athlete struggle, and kind of just looking more into it. The more the merrier. You know, there's plenty of research to go around. There's plenty of issues to talk about and things to dig into. So find where you fit in the issue and help us out.
Awesome. I'll add to that. I think she hates the word ally. I'm going to say co-conspirator and what that disruption looks like. And so, you know, if you're watching female sport, you know, and you notice there's only one girl of color on this team, don't see it as like, you know, that's amazing. Look at her. Think about, yes, that is amazing, but think about what that experience must have been like. I want y'all to also consider the ways in which class manifests. We talked about this a little bit with Dr. Brown. You know, volleyball is very expensive, very, very expensive. And so when you see Black girls participating in volleyball, I want y'all to have like a sociological conversation with self. Like, how can I apply intersectionality to this experience? I know that maybe on this travel team, there's only one or two. What is that relationship like with them? What sort of maybe access points are their family backgrounds coming from? Very similar to what we talked about with OJ, you know, class manifests in sport in different ways. And so when we're watching Black girls play and we're supporting Black women participate in sport, center race, center gender, center class, and center sexual orientation, and really think about how these lived experiences shape sport participation. So that is going to wrap up our module 4 history of the Black athlete table talk. Dr. Shaw, like I said, is at the University of Texas at Austin. If you have follow-up questions, you want to connect further with her, read more of her research, please reach out to her. I will be sure to post her email in Blackboard. And with that, thank you, Dr. Shaw.
All right, thanks y'all. Welcome horns.